Hi there, folks. This is Matthew Seville with SLRLounge.com and another episode of our weekly edit series. Now, in today's episode, we're going to process this image here, which we previously discussed how it was shot, what went into it, the capture as far as using a tripod, using wireless flash, and that kind of stuff, and what goes into creating the original frames that you would use to create this final result. Now, the original frames looked like this and this, and you can see this one is very bright and overexposed. If I bring up my metadata here, you'll see that this was shot at 30 seconds. That was my shutter speed, whereas this image here was just at a third of a second. So there's a dramatic difference in these two shots, and I want to combine them to get this final result or something similar, because I want to see this beautiful sky instead of this image here where it's just really, really dark. So let us open up both of these images in Camera Raw and then into Photoshop for the final merge, of course. And basically what we're going to do is we're going to process these two photos here in Camera Raw so that they look as similar as possible. But of course, this area in this image here is going to be kind of blown out. And this area in the background of this image, the noise is going to be absolutely horrible, and that's why we're going to merge them. But I still want to process them to look roughly the same so that it makes it easier to combine them in Photoshop. So, all right, let's get started. I'm going to double click on these two images so that they open up in the Camera Raw interface. I'm going to double click on my hand tool here to get everything at regular zoom. And as you can see for this image, I already had a little bit of processing applied. So to zero out all of these images, I'm going to click Camera Raw Defaults in the little tiny menu icon here in the upper right. Camera Raw Defaults, that'll give us what this image originally looked like. And let's do the same for this image here. Let's do Camera Raw Defaults. Okay, there we go. All right, let's get started with this image first. The first thing I see is that their skin is a little bit too pink. So that's what we're going to do right now. First, I'm going to dial it down somewhere until their skin tone looks nice. And I think I'm just going to hit my down arrow to kind of be precise. And now that I've got it down where I like their skin tone, right about +4 or 5, I'm realizing that I also need to bring down the temperature. So maybe I'm going to go from 2800 to, let's just hit my down arrow, 2500 maybe. Now their skin starts to look a little bit too cold, so let's try 2650. That looks good to me. All right, now the next thing that I need to do is I need to process this entire image, and to do that I'm going to use the SLR Lounge Preset System, and I'm going to go to the Soft Portrait section of my mixology, and I'm going to start by just clicking Standard Color for the Soft Portrait, because I don't want to do too much. I just want to give it some overall tonal adjustments. So I like what the Soft Portrait does. It kind of brings the blacks down a little bit while maintaining the shadows a little bit brighter. And then it does a little bit to preserve highlights and whites, which I want because this is a little bit blown out here. And so after doing that, let's come back to our preset system here and let's just scroll down. I want to really quickly try maybe a 0.5 stop increase, maybe a whole stop increase. Somewhere right about there looks good, a half a stop brighter. And then for the final adjustment, I know that I'm just going to need to crank my shadows like crazy. And so let's just drag that all the way up here on the shadows slider. And I know it's going to start to look weird, but remember that most of the image is going to be comprised of this capture here because it has much better image quality in these areas, in these shadows, because it was shot at ISO 100. So anyways, compared to this, all I really want is to get these areas here roughly the same brightness as these areas here so that I can blend it easily in Photoshop. So now actually let's start processing this image. I'm going to go straight to, well, remember I need to go down to, what was it, +5 here and then 2650 here. So let's do that first. And then let's try to process this image to match the other one. I'm going to go straight to my vivid landscape presets here though. And I want to try, let's try HDR strong. That's a little bit too much. So let's go to HDR light, or let's just try the vivid landscape standard color. Now I like the way this looks, but I'm going to have to come back to my basic tab here, and I'm going to have to do a lot more highlight preservation. So let's just grab that slider and crank it all the way down. Let's also bring the whites down a little bit too. But as you can see, it's definitely starting to clip and posterize there. But again, all I want is for it to roughly match this brightness here so that I can merge the two. Anyway, so that looks good. And next, let's worry about these areas here. Again, since I shot the image at ISO 100, I can afford to go to town on these shadows and just crank this slider all the way up without this image quality up here getting degraded by shadow noise too much. So, all right, let's have a look at these two images here. Now, this one is still really dark. I might need to bring my blacks up. I might need to bring the exposure up a little bit higher. And then let's maybe darken this one overall just a tiny bit, but then boost the blacks up even more. I think that the only thing missing from this image now is that maybe I need to do a slight tweak to the tint that is different from the tint adjustment that's applied to this image. I don't know why, but this image just looks a little bit more green in these shadows. So I'm going to bump it up a little bit more. I'm just hitting my up arrow key. Go a little bit right about there maybe. That looks good actually, right about there. And then I'll do a little bit more fine tuning down on the exposure. I think I like that. And so here we go. I'm ready to merge these two images. Now it doesn't have to be perfect, and I'll show you why in a second. All I'm going to do is I'm going to hit select all, and then I'm going to go down here to open images. But before I click open images, I'm going to hold down my shift key. As you can see, this little pop-up window that gives you a few hints. Shift click to open as smart object. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down my shift key. See how it says open objects now? When I click, it's going to open both of these images in Photoshop as smart objects. Now the reason that I want to do this is we have a couple other articles on SLR Lounge about this particular technique or trick, but essentially the idea is that if you open an image as a raw image, as a smart object in Photoshop, you can go back to that image in Camera Raw later, even if those images are part of a layered PSD file. And here, I'll show you how to do that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to drag this image so that it is in a separate window. And see how it's a smart object, the layer has this little icon here. I'm going to hit V so that I can click and drag, and I'm going to drag that image on top of this other image. So that now, let's close this image here. I'm going to click no because I don't want to save it. Now you can see that if I click and drag, I've got these two images together in Photoshop as two separate smart object layers. And if I click the little eyeball icon here on the layer, you can see the layer below. And what I'm going to do is go back to this layer here, and I'm going to create a mask over this image and hide this area so that you see the couple on the area below. So let's create a mask, just this little icon right here. And then I'm going to hit B to get my brush tool so I can brush on this mask. Of course, your mask has to be black. If the mask is white, you have to brush in black. So let's reset our masks so that I'm drawing in black on this white mask. And then let's just gently brush over this image, and there the couple is. It seems really, really easy, but there is one final thing that we need to do before this image is done. And that is, if I zoom in here, I'm just zooming with my scroll wheel, you can see that there's a slight discrepancy in the tiles here. And that is because, unfortunately, I bumped my tripod between the times when I shot these two photos. So here's what I'm going to do to fix that. I'm going to click on this image below, and then I'm going to hit Control T or Command T, which will allow me to move this one image around underneath and align it perfectly with the main layer above. So I'm just going to hit my left and right and up and down arrow keys to kind of line this up perfectly. I'm going to line it up based on this little area right here. So you can see if I click and drag, you can see how there's that square right there. I just want it to line up perfectly with that area right there. And then if I scroll around, you will notice that there may be some other areas that are slightly out of alignment, like these chairs right here. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to drag the rotation point, which is right here in the center of this transform option. I'm going to drag this rotation point all the way down to this area that I aligned perfectly. And then when I zoom out to rotate this image, it's going to rotate over that point. See how that works? So then all I have to do is line it up with the other areas in the image that are out of alignment. So it looks like I actually may have nailed it perfectly just by looking at it the other way. But just in case, what I would do is I would go over here and I would just carefully look at it and try and align it perfectly just like that. So something like that works good. And now I'm actually done with aligning these images and masking them. I'm going to hit Enter to save that transformation. And so now you can see if I hold down Shift and I click on this layer, you can see how they appear and disappear in this image. And the background is aligned perfectly. All right, folks, well, that's about it. There's really nothing else to do here unless there are some personal preferences. And if I really wanted to, I could readjust these layers individually, like I was saying. Say, I think, you know what, I really want to make this particular layer a little darker in the background here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to double click on this image, this layer here, and it's going to bring this raw photo up. See how it still says NEF? That's my raw photo coming up again in camera raw. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit K, and I'm going to do a little bit of burning and dodging. Let's use the Sky Cloud Ocean preset from the SLR Lounge Preset System. And let's just burn this down a little bit, add some contrast, kind of just get this overall area a little bit darker, and maybe up here even a little bit as well. So it looks a little bit more dark and moody. Maybe I don't want as much contrast, but I want a little bit more darker on the exposure. That looks cool right there. So let's click OK, and then it will update this PSD final image based on the raw processing. So you can see how that works. It looks really cool. Or of course, if I wanted to reprocess this layer a little bit, maybe I want to get a little bit more shadows going on in there, in his tux there. So I might click that, just a tiny tap right there, just to give his tux a little bit more. Maybe I would make a little bit smaller brush here and just kind of darken that down. That looks good. Let's click OK and come back here. See how this little haziness there is going to go away in a second. And I think in general, this image is done. That looks beautiful right there. If there is anything else I would possibly want to do to this image, it might be to correct the perspective distortion just a little bit. And to do that, I want to create a totally new layer as a combination of all of these layers. So to do that, I'm going to hit Shift Control Alt E, which is a really convoluted hotkey, but it's kind of helpful sometimes. So now what I have is a single layer that reflects both of the masking of these layers. Now what I want to do is I want to go into my Edit, Transform, and then do Perspective. And then I'm just going to click and drag on the top edge here and correct this. Maybe not all the way, but just a little bit like that. That looks good to me. I like it right there. Of course, if you want to, you could zoom out a little bit and go, really go to town on it. You don't want to do too much because they're going to start to look weird, but somewhere right about there like that looks good overall. All right, I'm going to click OK. I'm going to hit Enter. And there we go. Let's see how this looks. You can see the difference there. And you can also see the, the different blending that we've done here. And that's about it. We're done. Let's click Control S to save this. And I'm just going to save it as a PSD. And let's click Tab and just admire our handiwork here. Actually, you know what? I think there might be a little bit too much warping going on here. So I'm going to quickly just tweak this a tiny bit. I have my warp tool at a hotkey. So all I'm going to do is just kind of shrink them a tiny bit and zoom in. Yeah, let's see. Right there like that looks good. And then maybe history brush that back just a little bit like that. There we go. So now there we go. That's beautiful. Thank you so much everybody for tuning in today, and we'll see you in our next video. Take care.